Unsurprisingly, beer sales in NFL games are pretty big. If you want an example of what it's like around the league, look at the 2013 Indianapolis Colts. That season, they played 11 home games, playing 2 preseason games, 8 regular season games, and 1 postseason game at Lucas Oil Stadium. In their 11 home games, they made the vast majority of their money in concession sales through beer. In fact, beer sales during the 2013 season for the Colts doubled the sales of the next highest selling concession. When you combine beer, wine, and liquor sales from that 2013 season, in 11 home games, the Colts made close to $5 million. Football fans love their alcohol. For some fans of long-suffering teams, it's a necessity to get through an otherwise painful season. And these numbers in Indianapolis are similar throughout the league when it comes to the simple fact that beer sales are huge and tower over everything else. Now, there are some limits on beer sales. After the infamous Bottlegate incident in the game between the Browns and the Jaguars, the NFL banned the sale of beer after the third quarter. And there are limits on how many bottles of beer someone is able to buy. But even with these limits, it's hard to imagine NFL stadiums not selling beer. Heck, when the Vikings moved into TCF Bank Stadium for 2 years while US Bank Stadium was being constructed, a state law was passed allowing the sale of alcohol at the college football venue. So for an NFL game to take place without beer sales seems like something that wouldn't happen, simply because it is a huge monetary loss for venues. But that's exactly what happened on October 14, 1990. In a game involving the Los Angeles Raiders and the Seattle Seahawks, the stadium was completely dry. Alcohol sales were outlawed for 1 game only. And this is the story behind that. Obviously, something must have happened before this game that led to the banning of alcohol. So to tell the story of the dry game between the Raiders and the Seahawks on this mid-October day, we have to go back 1 month to September 23rd, 1990, when the Raiders took on the Steelers. In the 1970s, there were very few rivalries that were as intense as Steelers-Raiders. In the 5-season stretch from 1972 to 76, the Steelers and the Raiders played each other in the postseason 5 times, and met in 3 consecutive AFC championships. There was definitely some bad blood between the teams. In fact, there was so much bad blood that Raiders player George Atkinson filed a lawsuit against Steelers coach Chuck Noll for defamation of character, but that's another story for another day. But in the later half of the 1980s, the rivalry had cooled off a bit. Neither the Raiders nor the Steelers were very good during this time. The Raiders had switched cities from Oakland to Los Angeles, and the teams hadn't met in 6 years. Prior to this game, the last time that Pittsburgh played Los Angeles was all the way back on December 16, 1984. Pittsburgh won that game 13-7. But from 1985 to 1989, the teams did not play each other. This 1990 game was an opportunity to rekindle the fire and kickstart the rivalry again, especially since both teams were on the upswing. Pittsburgh made the postseason the year before in 1989, and the Raiders had started the 1990 season with a 2-0 record. On the field, the Raiders were able to get the victory, defeating their arch-rival by a final score of 20-3. With the score tied at 3-3 going into the half, Los Angeles scored 17 straight points in the second half, capped off with a Jay Schroeder 66-yard touchdown pass to Mervin Fernandez midway through the fourth quarter. That was the dagger. Unfortunately, the rivalry spilled into the stands as well, because late in the fourth quarter, with many of the 50,657 fans in attendance happy about the Raiders going to 3-0, things got very ugly very fast. Paul Albrecht was 35 years old at the time of this game and grew up in Pittsburgh. In 1990, Albrecht was living in Tucson, Arizona, and decided to take the 485-mile trek to Los Angeles to watch this game involving his hometown team. As he entered the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, he bought a souvenir program for $2.50, which donned the face of Steelers quarterback Bubby Brister. Here's the actual program, which you can actually buy on eBay right now for $20. Why a program at a Raiders game contained nothing but the image of a Steelers player, I'm not entirely sure, but that's besides the point. Albrecht bought the program, then went to his seat to watch the game. With the score at 20-3, things were looking bleak for Pittsburgh. So he decided to have a bit of fun with the crowd. Wearing a black polo shirt with Pittsburgh Steelers written on it in gold lettering, he walked through the crowd at the now half-empty Coliseum, putting the program up to his face. Whether Albrecht was interacting with the crowd, I'm not sure. There are conflicting reports on whether any taunts or back-and-forth remarks were exchanged, but it wasn't anything offensive. There are also conflicting reports about why he held the program up to his face. Some say he did this as a joke, while other witnesses said he did this to protect himself from peanuts and beer that people were throwing at him. Things got very serious very quickly, though, when Shane Geringer, a 19-year-old Raider fan who was shirtless, jumped out of the stands and tapped Albrecht on the shoulder. When Albrecht turned around, Geringer delivered a sucker punch. After delivering the first punch, Albrecht fell to the ground, the program flew out of his hands, and Geringer began kicking him. There was no weapon used during this attack. Albrecht's head landed hard on the concrete, and he may have been unconscious at the time. Geringer was the only one involved in the attack, and he was dragged off by policemen and security guards before getting arrested. This happened by the 50-yard line on the Steelers' side of the field. Some of the trainers for the Steelers noticed this and tried to give Albrecht medical attention. For a few brief moments, Albrecht did not have a pulse. However, once one was detected by security guards, he was loaded up into an ambulance. That Sunday night, he was in critical condition in the intensive care unit at the County USC Medical Center. He was in a brief coma. He remained in critical condition on Monday and was described by one spokeswoman at the medical center as unconscious and unresponsive. While Albrecht would not die from this and would eventually start responding to the treatment, the injuries were severe and life-altering. He suffered brain injuries. He lost some of his memory and motor skills. He had a broken jaw and even became deaf in one ear. One estimate says that Albrecht's medical bills were $90,000. Later on, Albrecht filed a lawsuit, which was settled in February 1994 for an undisclosed amount. And in 2002, when the Rose Bowl tried to get an NFL team back to Los Angeles, officials for the venue had one condition: any team but the Raiders. And they specifically mentioned this incident involving Geringer and Albrecht, saying that Pasadena residents were concerned about fights and drunkenness and disorderly conduct. As for Geringer, he was freed on a $30,000 bail and faced 4 years in prison. However, his sentence wound up being 83 days in jail and 3 years of probation, with Geringer's lawyer, Leslie Abramson, calling Geringer a good kid with a good heart and a big problem. 3 months later, Geringer got arrested again, this time on drunk driving charges after going through a red light. This entire situation was an unfortunate tragedy that should never happen at an NFL game. The Raiders were already being watched carefully, having developed a reputation for their unruly fan behavior after moving to Los Angeles. But this incident was the thing that broke the dam and caused the floodgates to open. Officials were calling on the Raiders and the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum to ban the sale of alcohol. And to an extent, they listened. One councilman for the city of Los Angeles said that alcohol sales needed to end at the Coliseum. The incident was described by the councilman as shocking, saying that it was distressingly symptomatic of a type of behavior that is on the rise at the Coliseum, in large part because of the consumption of alcoholic beverages. However, the Coliseum had no plans to change the alcohol policy. Spectacur is a private company that operated the Coliseum at this time, and Alicia Stillman, the spokeswoman for the company, said that it's not fair to deprive the thousands of people who enjoy beer at the game because of an isolated incident. Her defense was essentially that one bad apple shouldn't spoil the whole bunch. So for the following week's game against the Chicago Bears on September 30th, nothing changed. Despite the incident the week before, business carried on as usual. The Raiders beat the Bears 24-10 in front of their largest crowd of the season, as 80,156 fans showed up to watch the Raiders improve to 4-0 for the first time since 1984. And surprisingly enough, nothing happened in the stands. There was kind of a picnic feeling. Emotions may have run high or low, but there wasn't too much who am I kidding? Of course there was trouble. 31 people got arrested. This part of George Carlin's baseball versus football sketch has never been more accurate.
In football, in the stands during the game, you can be sure that at least 27 times you were perfectly capable of taking the life of a fellow human being. Preferably a stranger.
At this point, enough was enough. The Raiders were making national headlines for just how dangerous their games were. In an 8-day stretch, they had 2 home games, with one leading to a fan getting put in ICU and permanently losing his hearing in one ear. Another where 31 people got arrested and hundreds of security guards were needed because fights were breaking out left, right, and center. It wasn't just one bad apple. It wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a bunch of them. So it was time for the Raiders to do something drastic. Their next home game would be on October 14th against the division rival Seattle Seahawks. And the Coliseum decided to ban the sale of alcohol for this game. This would be a completely dry game. However, the ban would only last for one game. Future Raider games would feature alcohol sales, but with restrictions. Instead of being sold in 20-ounce containers, beer would now be sold in 16-ounce containers. The beer would be limited to 3.2% alcohol, and instead of stopping sales at the end of the third quarter, alcohol sales would be stopped at halftime. The Raiders won the dry game by a final score of 24-17. However, this game only drew 50,624 fans to the Coliseum, about 30,000 fans less than the game against Chicago. Fans inside the stadium made their displeasure known through signs and shirts. This was the team's smallest attendance of the season. Considering the fact that it was a pretty nice day at 66 degrees, and the fact that the Raiders were 4-1 entering this game, and I think it's safe to assume that the reason this was the smallest crowd of the year was because of the alcohol ban. Nowadays, it's hard to imagine a team or a stadium banning alcohol sales altogether. It's too much of a moneymaker, and security measures have improved over the years, especially nowadays where you can text a problem to a number instead of having to hope that a security officer is in your vicinity. But this is exactly what happened for one game in 1990 due to an unfortunate chain of events.